Good morning, and welcome to this week's What Comes Next Live. I say good morning. It's 10 o'clock for the podcast listeners. We're recording this week, not at 5 o'clock on a Tuesday UK time, but at 10 a.m. on a Wednesday. My guest in over 100 shows, my third repeat guest, is Tom Ahmad of Bailey Ahmad Business Recovery, who lives around the corner from me, and I'm looking forward to our next winter walk. Tom and I had lunch a few weeks ago, and I thought so much has changed in his business this year that it'd be good, having had him on at the beginning of January this year, it would be great to bring him back on again. And I also love modeling of work-life balance because Tom is the father of 4 children, all, I think, currently primary school age. I'm not sure if the oldest is moved on.
One's just gone to secondary.
One's just gone to secondary, but 5 o'clock is not necessarily the best time to do a call, but 10 o'clock in the morning, they're all in school. So a great example of modeling work-life balance from a business leader. Anyway, welcome back, Tom.
Thanks, Tom. I'm looking forward to it. I can't believe, to be honest, so much has changed since we spoke last. But it hasn't been that long, has it really? The world, I think for lots of people, the world is shifting so fast. So yeah, it'd be interesting.
Yes, I listened to the beginning of I re-listened to the beginning of our conversation from January, and it was quite stunning to remember that there'd been, the first Omicron variant, and our lives were dominated by lockdowns in winter and COVID issues. And I actually had my own little reminder of it this week because I had a bit of a cold, and I tested positive for COVID. I thought I'd better test before I go into town for a meeting yesterday. And tested positive for COVID for the first time. So I managed to dodge it for over 2.5 years. But as you can tell from my slightly husky voice, I'm very lucky. Having had 4 jabs, I'm just getting a mild cold. So, but yes, it's disrupted me because I had several face-to-face things, including speaking at an event on Thursday, which obviously had to not happen. But it was just a bit of a reminder, and a reminder to me of how resilient we are. We tend to move forwards and progress quite a lot. And just my little notes is that what you talked about as your themes at the beginning of the year were looking at your team and yourself and everybody else around, was that the energy was a bit down. So you said, what do we need to maintain energy? And it was to focus on our stability, clarity, and pace. And that's where you were 10 months ago.
I think I may have thrown a lot of that out the window, if I'm being honest with you. I think that the reality is that the world shifts so much that stability is a really hard thing to achieve when, because I think it's more of a sense of how people feel. I think I was talking about. I mean, we've all proven that we're incredibly resilient, adaptable to change. The economy is very adaptable to changes. We've all dealt with it actually surprisingly well. So I think it's more about managing people's sort of comfort and perception with change. So I guess instead of thinking about stability as such, it's almost making us a bit more anti-fragile, including myself, which was just an accidental shift because it's impossible to create stability when the world is shifting around everybody individually. Business is changing, calls upon us as a business have changed. 10 months on, or whatever it is, months on, what I've worked on is when I've faced a challenge or a problem, I've built the resource or asset to try and manage that problem better. So shifting my mindset from, thinking a challenge is a bad thing, but a challenge is an opportunity. And for us now, we have put in a lot of the pieces that will allow us now to, I guess, go to the next stage of our development as a business. I'm still the boy that grew up above a shop in South Norwood. I'm still sort of business is part of who I am, and business and life is a mix. But what we've now got is I realize that the value is in having a great team. I knew that before, but really, really leveraging that. And for me to let go a lot more. Having started the practice with Paul in 2007, where we did everything ourselves, from stuffing envelopes, buying the laptops, all those little things. There's a tendency to get in and fix stuff yourself. That only gets so far when there's only so many hours in the day, and you're still providing advice to clients, and you're managing a team. So putting in the leadership team that really creates almost that sort of that's the strength, I think, in dealing with the challenges. We've got a HR director now. We've got an FD. I've been quite clear about my role in sort of heading up the strategy. We've got people that are taking a lead in sales and the various service lines. And even though we're relatively small, we've built a structure that can weather a much bigger operation. But really, that's more about being better able to deal with the challenges, which you can turn into an opportunity. We've done all the sort of a lot of the tech infrastructure. That's the easy bit. We had moved to a business that didn't bring people to work, but brings work to people, which is a big shift. People call it flexible. Some people call it remote working. It is flexible, but for me, it's making sure that the work comes to the people and not the other way around. And that's been fantastic, but also changing how we work, because that is a different way of working. And there's been a lot of trial and error in that process, and shifting the emphasis of how we operate. We've become much more on the front foot, and putting those pieces in place, as well as being really clear on our values, which we did some work on before, is really putting us in a position where we can respond to the needs of our clients and business. We're in the business of not just business recovery now. We do debt recovery, credit control, and also commercial finance, because really we're in the business of keeping businesses going. The biggest challenge is cash flow, and cash flow just isn't at the insolvency end. It happens much earlier on. And it's a challenge also if you're a successful business and you're trying to grow. So I've been fortunate enough to have a network and a group of people that we can bring together. And that's required a lot of change, a lot of adapting and compromise, and a lot of being stood corrected. Bringing someone in to do something, they're going to do it maybe a bit different to you, and that's what has been a challenge for me in terms of developing my own way of leading and working with others. So where I am now and where we are as a business now is that we've just got a fantastic team who are much clearer on what we're all doing. We're all focused on those things. And now we're just trying to look up and go, well, what's the world look like around us now? And coincidentally, there is a real need for what we do. So I'm almost very glad that we've got this in place so that we can respond to the world around us. And we're not so local anymore. Our team is very spread.
Right.
We've got a team member in Newcastle, we've got someone down on the South Coast, we've got some support overseas, and we've got quite a distributed team. And we've also got additional skills with specialisms in other areas other than insolvency. So we're all learning about each other and what we can offer in this new format. So a lot of change, but each one of those changes have been necessary to respond to a challenge we faced along the way.
Let me pause you, because I would encourage any business leader who, if they introspect, recognizes they need to let go a little bit and put structures and empower their teams if they're going to get to the next level. I'd encourage them to listen to that monologue you just had, because I wrote down about 8 things, which in my experience supporting leaders in that position, you and your partner in the business, Paul, you have done in the last couple of years. You and I first met about 2 years ago, and first of all, I'm going to poke you a little bit. It's not a coincidence that the people in the economy need what your business provides now. You actually saw that coming a couple of years ago, right?
Yeah.
And you got, because the two of you have between you nearly 40 years experience in this business. And the brave leadership was going, we need to invest when things are, quieter. We need to invest rather than draw money out of the business. We need to invest in the business and get it ready. You mentioned the phrase anti-fragile. What does that mean to you?
On a personal level, I think it's almost an element of stoicism about the realities of a world around you. Understanding change happens and things happen outside of your control, and finding the skills and finding the kind of the mental capacity to cope with that as best you can. Yeah. So for me, that then puts you in a position to make the best decisions on how to respond to those events. So
just in case Nicholas Nassim Taleb is listening to this podcast at some point, who wrote the book Anti-Fragile, I'm going to kind of give you his definition, but also use that as an acknowledgement, because I heard you say that, wrote it down, and then there's various things you talked about, which I'll just reflect on these a little bit. To him, he wrote the book Anti-Fragile because he wrote the book, the concept of black swans, which is extremely rare events that are unpredictable, but when they happen, have a huge impact. So people would have said, so what do I need to do? And he said, not just build resilience, make sure you're ready, make sure you can cope, make sure you've got the cash flow, etc. But to be anti-fragile is to set yourself up so that not only are you resilient, but that you can then, in the language you talked about, language you and I both use, of every challenge as an opportunity, that you're ready to respond, not react, that you're ready to do positively well when things which previously could impact you and find you fragile. If you're anti-fragile, you're actually gone beyond a level of maintenance, but you've gone to a level of doing even better when things are problematic. So in listening to you, you put a leadership team in. You've also noted that sometimes they're not going to agree with you. And so you've got to sometimes they might do things better than you in specific areas, which are all things that small business owners need to look at. And your business is not so small anymore. But you're in a position where you can scale the opportunities so that as you are needed to help businesses keep going in different forms, your business is well set up, from being distributed around the UK to having the work come to people rather than come to the work, to having a larger team, to having a functional team that knows who's responsible for what. You're really well positioned commercially to respond when. So instead of creaking at the seams because you haven't got the people or the IT systems, or you don't have a clear set of values through which you behave and make decisions, over the last couple of years, you've worked with extreme focus through the pandemic, and really, yes, COVID is still with us, but the day-to-day impact of the pandemic is behind us on business. Just to commend you that you've really committed to this, and you definitely have an anti-fragile business. So your business is booming, basically.
Thank you, Tom, for that sort of synopsis. I think that the truth is, with the people around me, I recognize that actually I like working with people that are better than me. But it also naturally has the effect of making you feel a bit insecure, imposter syndrome. So that actually is part of who I am, but I still move forward with that. Talking to my son about courage, it's moving forward when you're afraid. Him going to secondary school was a real big moment for him. So I've recognized I have courage in me, but the truth is, like everybody else, we are learning as we go, and learning requires a bit of vulnerability. And There have been times, and many times over this period, that I've felt as vulnerable as a business owner that's had a bad debt and that's going to potentially fail. But I've also seen in all the work that I do, the power of individuals to deal with crisis beyond their own, maybe their own belief. And I've certainly started to reflect and see that in myself. So these moments aren't easy at all. But I tell you what, when you do hear somebody and you ask, you stand corrected, and you see someone show their talent and skill, and you step back, it's fantastic. And and that's made me stronger and better, even though in that moment I was weak and I didn't have the answer. And I'm sort of going around that, but I think you gave a really sort of strong, fantastic, maybe that we had this all planned out and everything. It didn't work that way. And I don't think business really does. I think it works in that, you try your best, and as long as you don't get in the way of yourself, and as long as you are not too proud. And I think pride is actually, I'm a proud person, but not to the extent that it can damage you. And I meet a lot of very strong characters, a lot of strong directors, and actually, they've had warning signs from people around them, and they never responded to that because they were just too proud, didn't talk to people. So Paul and I have had each other. We're very different characters, so it's not just been about me. We've both had reflection. I've had time with you. I've had time with my peers and colleagues, and I've been lifted up by those around me, and I hope I've done something to lift them up. And that's fantastic. So the lesson in that to me is that we can all achieve a great deal if we open up to those around us and we're prepared to learn and listen. I talk too much often, and I am learning to listen more. And that's my wisdom emerging and my maturity. But I'm in my early 40s. I think the other thing is perspective. Paul said to me, Tom, you're always trying to get there today, and you need to pace yourselves. I'll still try and get there today, but I recognize that I can't do it on my own. And
you're sharing for the podcast listeners some of your introspective insights. And if I reflect to you in the time I've known you, you might not have said this a couple of years ago about the imposter syndrome piece, being impatient and all of those things. And what it speaks to me is I've got these, I have this belief that if leaders have 4 attributes of what I call open leadership in tandem, that's a strength, and repetition's valuable. I've said it before on podcasts. Is this the 2 pairs? And the first is, are you brave and hungry? So, you definitely...
I've got 4 young kids. I've got no choice, Tom.
You definitely wanted to bring your business forward. You definitely wanted to bring your business forward, take it to the next level. It was also driven, both you and Paul, by a sense of purpose and values. But those on their own could be exhausting. They could even be toxic if you're just brave and hungry. Drive, push, ego, all that stuff. But what you just demonstrated in spades with what you just talked about was the other couplet of the 4 is the brave, hungry, but also open and humble. So, if you're only open and humble, then that can be an energy downer for everybody, potentially. We've got a fantastic team. I'm just using some of your words. We've got a fantastic team. We're positioned really well to help businesses to grow our own business in all the different areas. You've added new areas, you've added new business streams. But you bring with that this openness so that people can bring forward ideas and not be shot down. I've been kind of alongside you and Paul on part of this journey and kept up to speed with you the last year or so. And it's just fantastic to see it beginning to come into place. So there are bumps in the road, and there are tough moments, but you've had this consistent commitment to learning and growth, and both for yourselves and the business. And I think an example, did you not say to me at lunch that you're not taking appointments anymore?
I'm certainly reducing them dramatically.
Yeah,
But that's the case because
misconstrued it, but for people who are not, noting, if you're in an insolvency practice, that's a major shift for one of the partners in the practice to, radically reduce the number of appointments as that they take.
I think, do you know what? Just a couple of things I just want to tell you that there's a recognition is, there was a time where you had to do everything and spread yourself. I think when we've created a team, we've looked at, what roles need to be fulfilled and who are best placed to fulfill those roles. And in this period of quite fast change, it's a bit like we've built this boat now that can take a large crew, but it needs steering and it needs managing, and that's complex. And allowing some space to do that. And I've just been handed a cup of tea from my wife, so that's the right time. So to do that requires commitment. At the same time, I'm really keen to empower and bring on the people that join our business. And join our team, because it's quite broad. And one of the things about staying in a position, where you're sort of responsible and doing it, I'm shifting to being a bit more of a mentor. So I'm asking someone else to do it that I know, trust. My job is to put the resources around that team and to be beside them. And I think use the analogy of a pilot and a co-pilot. So whilst I might not take the appointments, I'm sitting next to them. So you've got control now. And how are you feeling about it? And what's really cool about it is, one, I've got a business partner that's still doing that piece. So that's easy. It's easy because Paul and I are very close. We always collaborate, even though on everything. But we're now collaborating with Matt, and we're collaborating with the rest of the team. We're putting in KPIs, we're putting in infrastructure that will reduce the risk of failure and enhance their ability to do it. But if I'm still sitting in that seat, I'm not moving forward to doing the bits that the other people are doing, and they're not stepping forward into that space too. So me moving away, actually, I've seen Matt, for example, who's taking a lot of the appointments now, grow massively. Like in terms of his commitment. I've also seen a flourishing of his ideas. And so in terms of the output for the clients, they're getting the best bits of more people. And for me, I'm sort of standing a bit more front and center, more confidently in a different space. And, I've got to perform, but I've not got the excuse of being distracted here because I've got somebody else that's covering that off. It's a big shift. It's a big shift, but it's the right shift. It's doing the right thing for the team at this time. But yeah.
I remember years ago when I was building a team very rapidly in a business, in the coaching business, we were all taken to a conference overseas and they asked for a team to volunteer to do an exercise. And our team, we would always step forward and we volunteered. And they marked out on the ground in this conference room with everybody around us, the shape of a ship. And said, what position on the ship is everybody going to take? And it was an energetic exercise. And it was really interesting who saw themselves as the captain, who saw themselves at the front of the ship, who saw themselves in the engine room. And this, to some extent, is you being the captain, like, at the highest point of the ship, steering, looking ahead. And you're no longer saying, hang on a minute, I've got to go down to the engine room for a while. You can continue to steer it. So it's interesting.
Yeah. I think, do you know what? I think one of the things is a reflection is that I kind of live in the future a little bit. And that living in the future and then being pulled into the now quite a lot in the day. And it will always happen. We're a growing business, and I will jump in and do what I need to do. But I'm very much living in the future, and in a way, you need to stay there a little bit longer. Sometimes if you drag back, it's like being interrupted.
Yeah.
And it's a real challenge. I can see what pieces we have in place and what optimization needs to happen. But really what I'm thinking about is what's the next piece that will have, what's the next challenge coming up and how can we prepare for that? And I didn't appreciate the value until you sort of look back, but actually I had done this before the pandemic. I was playing with Microsoft Teams. I was speaking to our IT guys a year before about a move to Microsoft Azure. And they said, well, you don't need to do this, Tom. You've got a team in an office. They're quite happy. You've got everything you need. But I still played with that. So when the pandemic happened, I already had the answer or the option.
Yeah.
And that's continued. And the good thing about that is good for the business. The bad thing for me is actually I don't often spend enough time reflecting on those good steps because I've moved on now. I'm thinking about the next bit of the future.
This is really great to listen to all of this. And again, I encourage people to listen to this very carefully because if they run a business or lead any organization of any kind. I was working with a client recently who said something very similar to me, that they know that the self-awareness is huge in the leader, right? So being aware that you typically operate in a future space. Look around the client I was working with is part of a C-suite of a larger company. And they know that they have to look at their peers and say, where do they sit? And the CEO who they work with is going to be operating whose job is to be in the future space, right? The job of the C-suite is generally to deliver on the vision, but also be strategic. But when they work with their team, they sometimes need to be more in the now, in the operational. And the last piece there is you talking about, well, it's useful to pause and go, well, what actually happened before crashing on with the next thing. I want to just take the last few minutes of having had you talk through, for those listening, many nuggets, almost a masterclass on, transforming a business through leadership. The future piece. Now, I mentioned that I'm sitting here isolating because I tested positive for COVID, but yet nothing much changes for me because I mostly work online. And I'm very fortunate to not be ill. But I was supposed to be the speaker at a dinner for a bunch of CEOs on Thursday.
Yes.
And I'd like your thoughts on this. These are all CEOs of profitable companies turning over from the few million to the tens of millions, right? So as in revenue levels. For those not in the UK has this weird choice of the word turnover, which for the rest of the world means how often are our staff leaving. So they're all profitable right now, but what's the crystal ball? So I didn't want to do the usual year-end update. But what I did do is to say, let's run a thought experiment that the recession will last for 3 years.
Yeah.
Not just 6 months or 12 months, everything will be fine, but will actually last for 3 years.
I think that's the way to approach things.
It's going to last for 3 years. So I had a way of framing, what will you do now? What opportunities will that create, etc. What are your thoughts on, what questions would you ask or advice would you give to businesses? Because you did, first of all, I think what we can both agree on is the very first thing to look at is, what's your cash position? What's your balance sheet? How much finance can you have available? If you can get a line of credit in place, whether or not you need it right now, if you can buy into the idea that the recession is going to last longer than 6 to 12 months, you may well need cash. Yeah. And if you can secure it now while commercial financing is available, even if you don't need to draw it down, that's an insurance policy worth having. But what thoughts would you have to give to business owners and leaders about your crystal ball looking into the future?
Do you know what I think? I think we're dealing with a very set of different circumstances in this recession. I think it will, coming out of a pandemic, coming out of Brexit, there's a war in Europe, all the things that we've heard in the news. I think you just need to look at the stability of your business and or the foundational piece. How exposed are you? And try to de-risk yourself in as many places as possible. And I think it's a little bit at the minute hunkering down and seeing what happens. Now, for me, my business is slightly different because we're sort of counter-cyclical.
Yeah.
So, and I have to say, during the pandemic, when we weren't very busy, and I do know some of our peers were furloughing staff because insolvency actually wasn't needed during the pandemic, largely because there was a lot of government support.
Yeah.
But we were investing in infrastructure. What you said, we kept our team on, but we got them to reconfigure and recalibrate. So that doesn't mean you don't spend money, but I think you have to do it on things that are going to set you up for the other side of this and allow you to survive a protracted period. If the recession isn't as bad, brilliant. You may not have grown as much in the period, but you've got a sound base to move forward. But I do think it will be a survival of the fittest.
Yeah.
I do think that probably needs to happen in our economy. I think we've been in a period of prolonged, I suppose prolonged growth, and we've never really had a recession for some time. For many business leaders and owners, they've not experienced a time like we're going to go through. Yeah. And so I just think keep your eyes open, strip out the fat, be focused, stay nimble and lean, and just see what happens. I think that's just a win-win all round.
Well, I would go a bit further. I would also say talk to people who are old enough to have led businesses through A, recessions, and B, environments of higher interest rates.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's a very, very good point.
Higher interest rates are here to stay for a while, and people thrived through that when that was the norm. So there are ways to look at it. And I guess my one thought would be, all the notes I had to speak to these CEOs started in the way you talked about, but then I didn't use the word anti-fragile, but having talked about it with you, I loved the Warren Buffett phrase, be fearful when others are greedy and be greedy when others are fearful. So from a business opportunity standpoint, Warren Buffett's company has over $100 billion in cash sitting right now. Why? Because they were fearful when others were greedy. They were not buying at the top of the market. And he also has an analogy that imagine you're an investor and your investments are like having a revolver, an old 6-shooter.
Yes.
You could only make 6 investments in your lifetime. How would that make you think differently about investments? So I look at the UK property market right now, which I'm looking at for myself. Right? And I'm currently thinking it's not 6 or 12 months, or look at it in the spring. It's in the area that you and I both live in, the kind of nice houses around here. Those people are not what we call, in quotes, motivated sellers. They're not going to be willing to drop their prices because the market's dropped in the next 6 months or even 12 months. But if the market stays down for 18 months, then the opportunities will come to buy things at a lower price. And the same thing, I'm just taking the opportunity to share some of the thoughts I didn't get to give at this dinner on Thursday. Then the opportunities come. So if you're in business, the reality of business is those who are de-risked, those who are resilient, those who have the ability to be cashed up, the opportunities to buy other businesses will come not necessarily really quickly, but the longer things go on, the more those. So 2023 is there will be opportunities, but if you're thinking of expanding and you can get in a position where you can do that, turning this challenge into opportunities will happen more in 2024.
Yeah, and
I'm actually just encouraging people to spread their timeline out. And as you and I both said, if the recession doesn't last that long, fine. They're great. It's not so bad. But if it does, then how can you be anti-fragile? How can you turn that negative into a positive for you?
Yeah, and I think also look at the people around you and invest in good people. And there aren't that many. And by giving them more skills, giving yourself skills, and giving yourself time to look around and respond, you'll just be in a better position to respond to those opportunities. Whether you buy businesses or whether those businesses just wither and you just perform better and you just take on those clients.
Take their clients, yeah.
And be customer focused, and customers have changed. Where they shop, how they shop, what they do, and that's all been accelerated. We've tried to keep alive businesses during the pandemic as we wait to see what happens. I think now we're clearer what's going to happen. My job will be to recycle those assets back into the economy in a different way. But we'll get through it. The one thing that Tom, the pastor, showed me, talking to my father's generation, mother's generation, and people that have just been there for, everyone will get through this. And also, we just need to look out for each other. The other thing, Tom, is I do think there's a big place for community. Yeah. So whilst we're here talking about business, there are vulnerable people out there. There are vulnerable neighbours, and I think we do have a duty to support those that are struggling. Yeah. Even in our business, if you've got members of your team that need extra support, but around you, that there's a good place for us to be entrepreneurial in our communities, and entrepreneurial when thinking about if you're going to rebuild or reconfigure, about the environment. Can we do things in a more fuel efficient, zero carbon way? All of those things, they're on the table. So it's about saving money in some places, but investing in the right way. And that's broader than just the sort of the obvious business things.
True. And just to pick up on one last thing you said, it was one of my key themes for those CEOs I won't get to talk to. And you said one of the things is, it may be one of the things that often gets cut in a recession is people.
Yeah.
Wherever possible, recognizing that sometimes you have to make some very tough choices as a business leader in a recession to cut costs and cut staff. Wherever possible, invest in your people, because it will pay dividends in the long run, just like invest in your community, and find ways to do that. And often it's Adam Smith's division of labor. It's not necessarily go down and volunteer it's what I did at the beginning of the pandemic. I went to the local deli that was entrepreneurial and stayed open in the lockdowns. And I walked to him and, took my turn one person at a time into the shop and said, look, at the time I was living on my own in central London. Can I help you with deliveries? Mm. He said, you're the 8th person today to offer that. And I went, it's okay. I'll call you if I need you. I went, okay.
And that's the sort of business that I think the truth is that the sort of business that has strong values and invests in their customers and their community around them actually generally get a hell of a lot of support in the tough times.
But they're doing fine and they're expanded since. But the point really was for entrepreneurs, how can you best support your community? And what I did, this was like a light bulb for me. And I went back to my desk in my flat and I reached out to a bunch of networks and said, put me in touch with business owners and let me just help them get through this crisis. Let me apply my skills as an entrepreneur and as a crisis manager. So there are lots of different things. So I recognize we've gone over, as we did last time we spoke.
Sorry about
some closing words of as you move into wisdom space, as you kind of reflected in different words, some closing words of wisdom for our audience, Tom.
It will be okay. It will
Brilliant.
Be fine. That's all you need to know. Chin up, growth mindset, love your neighbor, love your family, and just work smart. It'll be okay.
It'll be okay. Words of wisdom. Thank you so much for coming back on, Tom. And I know we've got a walk in the woods planned in a couple of weeks. I look forward to that too.
Fantastic. Take care, Tom. Thank you.